490 pound-feet of torque from an engine that officially made just 390 horsepower. In the late 1960s, Chrysler's 440 six-pack became the torque monster that redefined what street performance meant, proving you didn't need the highest horsepower numbers to dominate the street or strip. Picture this. It's 1969, and you pull up to a stoplight in your brand-new Plymouth Road Runner. The guy next to you in his Chevelle SS 396 revs his engine, confident his big block will leave you in the dust. He glances at your fender badge, 440 six-pack, and smirks, knowing his 375 horse-rat motor should have you covered. The light turns green. 3 seconds later, he's watching your taillights disappear while trying to figure out what just happened. That's the 440 six-pack experience, an engine that made believers out of skeptics 1/4 mile at a time. The Mopar 440 six-pack wasn't just another muscle car engine. It was Chrysler's answer to a very specific problem. How do you create massive, instant torque for street dominance while keeping the engine civilized enough for daily driving? The solution involved 3 Holley 2-barrel carburetors, high-flow cylinder heads, and engineering that prioritized real-world performance over magazine racing. Between 1969 and 1971, this combination would power over 14,000 Roadrunners, Super Bs, and Challengers, creating a legend that still commands respect at car shows and drag strips today. To understand why the 440 six-pack shocked everyone, we need to travel back to 1968. The muscle car wars were reaching their peak. Ford had the 428 Cobra Jet. Chevrolet was pushing the 427. Pontiac had their Ram Air engines. But Chrysler? They had a problem. Their 440 Magnum was powerful, but couldn't match the mystique of the 426 Hemi. The Hemi was a beast, 425 horsepower of pure intimidation, but it was expensive, temperamental, and frankly, overkill for most street warriors. Insurance companies were starting to crack down on high-performance cars, and the Hemi's reputation made it a red flag for anyone under 30 trying to get coverage. Chrysler needed something special, something that could run with the Hemi on the street but wouldn't scare away insurance agents or drain wallets at the gas pump. They needed an engine that could idle smoothly at stoplights, cruise comfortably on the highway, but transform into a tire-shredding monster when provoked. Enter the engineers at Chrysler's Highland Park facility who looked at the successful 440 Magnum and asked a simple question. What if we gave it 3 carburetors? Now, multiple carburation wasn't new. Hot rodders had been bolting multiple carbs onto engines since the 1940s. Pontiac had their tri-power setup. Oldsmobile had experimented with triple twos, but most of these setups were finicky, requiring constant adjustment and delivering questionable reliability. The problem wasn't just making power, it was making power while maintaining drivability. Too much carburation, and the engine would bog, stumble, and foul plugs in traffic. Too little, and you were leaving performance on the table. Chrysler's solution was brilliant in its execution. Instead of 3 4-barrel carburetors like some expected, they chose 3 Holley 2-barrel units, Model 2300s to be exact. The center carburetor was a 350 CFM unit that handled all normal driving duties. It had full choke and idle circuits, essentially making the engine run like a standard single-carb 440 during regular driving. The 2 outboard carburetors were 500 CFM units that only opened under hard acceleration, activated by a progressive linkage system. When you buried your right foot, vacuum-operated linkage would snap open those outboard carbs, suddenly feeding the engine 1,350 CFM of combined airflow. But here's where it gets interesting. The carburetor setup was just one piece of the puzzle. Chrysler engineers knew that airflow was worthless without the ability to use it. They started with the 440's robust bottom end, a forged steel crankshaft, forged connecting rods, and cast pistons that raised compression to 10.51. This was aggressive for a street engine in 1969, especially one designed to run on pump gas. Most manufacturers were already backing off compression ratios as fuel quality became inconsistent, but Chrysler pushed forward, knowing that compression equals torque. The real magic happened in the cylinder heads. The six-pack heads weren't just standard 440 units. They featured larger exhaust valves, 1.74 inches compared to the standard 1.60, and revised port shapes that improved flow by nearly 15% at high lift. The intake ports were matched to work specifically with the aluminum intake manifold, which itself was a work of art. Unlike the cast iron intake on the standard 440, the six-pack's aluminum piece saved 40 pounds and featured perfectly sized runners that created optimal velocity for the triple-carb setup. The camshaft was where Chrysler showed real restraint and intelligence. Instead of going wild with duration and overlap like many performance engines of the era, they chose a hydraulic cam with 268 degrees of duration and 450 inches of lift. This was actually milder than many expected, but it was perfectly matched to the engine's intended use. The moderate cam timing meant the engine would idle smoothly at 750 RPM, pull strong vacuum for power brakes, and build massive torque right off idle. Peak torque, all 490 pound-feet of it, arrived at just 3,200 RPM. This wasn't some peaky race engine that needed to be wound out. This was a sledgehammer that hit hard and early. Let's talk about that torque number for a second. 490 pound-feet in 1969 was extraordinary. The 427 Chevrolet made 460. The 428 Cobra Jet produced 445. Even the mighty 454 LS6 that would debut in 1970 only made 500 pound-feet, and that was with 14 more cubic inches and significantly more aggressive tuning. The 446-pack was making Hemi-level torque with pump gas, hydraulic lifters, and a warranty. The progressive carburetor linkage was a masterpiece of mechanical simplicity. Under light throttle, only the center carb operated. The engine would cruise at 70 mph, getting reasonable fuel economy. Owners reported 15 to 17 mpg highway, remarkable for a big block muscle car. But mat the throttle, and things changed dramatically. At about 40% throttle opening, the vacuum secondaries would begin to crack open. By 60% throttle, all three carbs were wide open, and the engine transformed from Jekyll to Hyde. Testing at Chrysler's Chelsea Proving Grounds revealed just how effective this setup was. A 1969 Road Runner with the 446-pack, torque flight automatic, and 4.10 gears ran 13.5 seconds at 105 mph in the quarter mile. With slicks and a good driver, 13.2s were possible. These were Hemi-comparable times from an engine that cost $250 less and didn't require premium fuel or constant valve adjustments. But the real story wasn't just straight-line performance. The 446-pack excelled where most muscle car engines struggled, in real-world driving situations. The massive torque meant you could leave stoplights in second gear and still smoke the tires. Highway passing was effortless. Even loaded with 4 adults and luggage, a 6-pack car never felt strained. This was usable performance, not just bragging rights. The intake manifold deserves special attention. Cast from aluminum alloy, it featured equal-length runners that Chrysler engineers spent months perfecting in flow bench testing. Each runner was sized to maintain velocity while maximizing volume. The plenum area where all 3 carburetors fed was carefully shaped to prevent fuel puddling and ensure equal distribution to all 8 cylinders. The result was an intake that flowed 15% better than the standard cast iron unit while weighing 40 pounds less. Chrysler didn't stop with just airflow improvements. The entire valve train was beefed up to handle the increased performance. Stronger valve springs with 280 pounds of seat pressure kept the valves under control at high RPM. The push rods were thicker than standard units. Even the rocker arms were shot-peened for extra strength. Every component was chosen for durability under sustained high-performance use. The exhaust system was equally well thought out. The cast-iron exhaust manifolds were specific to six-pack applications, featuring larger outlets and smoother flow paths. They fed into a true dual exhaust system with 2.5-inch pipes and low-restriction mufflers. The entire system was tuned to work with the engine's torque curve, providing just enough back pressure for low-end response while flowing freely at high RPM. Here's something most people don't know. The 446-pack actually had two different versions. The 1969 version, coded E63, made its 390 horsepower at 4,700 RPM. For 1970 and 1971, Chrysler introduced the E65 version with slightly different cam timing and a revised carburetor calibration. On paper, it still made 390 horsepower, but many who drove both versions swore the later engines felt stronger. Chrysler never officially acknowledged any difference, but dyno testing by magazines showed the 1970-71 engines consistently making 10-15 more horsepower than their 1969 counterparts. The six-pack option transformed every car it touched. In the Plymouth Road Runner, it turned an already potent muscle car into a street terror. The combination of the Road Runner's relatively light weight, about 3,400 pounds, and the six-pack's massive torque created a package that could humble much more expensive machinery. A six-pack Road Runner could embarrass Corvettes, challenge Cobras, and give even Hemi cars a serious run for their money. The Dodge Super Bee received the same treatment, and if anything, it was even more of a sleeper. While the Road Runner had achieved celebrity status, the Super Bee flew under the radar. Many unsuspecting challengers learned too late that the humble-looking Dodge with the cartoon bee on its quarter panel packed 490 pound-feet of twist under its hood. But perhaps the most impressive six-pack application was the 1970-71 Plymouth Cuda and Dodge Challenger. These E-body cars were heavier than their B-body cousins, but they wore their performance more elegantly. A six-pack Cuda or Challenger could cruise the boulevard in style, then unleash hell at the drag strip on Sunday. The combination of the E-body's sophisticated suspension and the six-pack's broad power band created one of the most well-rounded muscle cars ever built. The reliability of the six-pack setup surprised everyone, including Chrysler. Multiple carburetors had a reputation for being maintenance nightmares, but the six-pack proved remarkably robust. The key was the progressive linkage system. Since the outboard carburetors only operated under full throttle, they stayed clean and properly adjusted. The center carb did all the daily driving work, and it was no more complex than any single four-barrel setup. That's not to say the six-pack was maintenance-free. The three carburetors needed synchronization occasionally, and the vacuum-operated secondary system required periodic adjustment. But compared to the valve lash adjustments required by solid-lifter engines or the constant tuning needed by some other multiple-carb setups, the six-pack was remarkably civilized. Many owners reported going entire seasons without touching the carburetors. The air cleaner assembly was another piece of six-pack genius. The massive oval air cleaner housed a paper element that flowed enough air for all three carburetors while providing excellent filtration. But the really clever part was the vacuum-operated flapper valve in the air cleaner snorkel. Under full throttle, this valve would open, allowing the engine to breathe cooler outside air rather than hot underhood air. This simple system was worth 10 to 15 horsepower on a hot day. The 446-pack's influence extended beyond just straight-line performance. It changed how people thought about street engines. Before the six-pack, conventional wisdom said you needed either a mild street engine or a wild race engine. The six-pack proved you could have both. It showed that with careful engineering, you could create an engine that was comfortable in traffic, yet capable of mid-13 second quarter miles. Production numbers tell an interesting story. In 1969, Chrysler built approximately 1,907 six-pack engines. For 1970, production jumped to 7,151 units as word spread about the engine's capabilities. The 1971 model year saw 4,151 six-pack engines built before insurance pressures and emissions regulations ended the party. In total, just over 14,440 six-pack engines were produced, making them rare but not impossibly scarce. The end came quickly. By late 1971, the insurance industry had effectively declared war on muscle cars. Compression ratios were dropping to meet emission standards. High-performance engines were being discontinued left and right. The 440 six-pack, with its 10.51 compression and triple carburetors, was clearly doomed. The 1971 model year would be its last, ending a 3-year run that had redefined street performance. But the six-pack's legacy lived on. The engine proved that innovative engineering could overcome traditional limitations. It showed that torque, not just horsepower, was the key to street dominance. Most importantly, it demonstrated that a performance engine could be both powerful and practical, a lesson that would influence engine design for decades to come. The aftermarket embraced the six-pack concept enthusiastically. Edelbrock, Offenhauser, and other manufacturers produced aftermarket six-pack intake manifolds. Holley continued producing the specific carburetors needed for the setup. Today, you can still build a six-pack engine using a combination of original and reproduction parts, testament to the design's enduring appeal. For collectors and enthusiasts today, the 440 six-pack represents the pinnacle of old-school muscle car engineering. These engines command premium prices at auctions, especially in original, numbers-matching cars. A documented six-pack Roadrunner or Super Bee can easily fetch 6 figures at auction, with pristine examples approaching $200,000. The rarity and desirability of these engines have only grown with time, but beyond the collector market, the 440 six-pack remains relevant to modern enthusiasts. The design principles, broad torque curve, progressive power delivery, street-friendly manners with race-ready capability, are exactly what modern performance enthusiasts seek. Many builders still use the six-pack as a template for building street engines, proving that good engineering never goes out of style. The technical influence of the six-pack extended into modern engine design. The concept of staged power delivery, where additional fuel and air circuits activate based on demand, became standard in everything from motorcycle carburetors to modern electronic fuel injection systems. Variable intake systems, now common on performance engines, follow the same principle the six-pack pioneered: match airflow to engine demand for optimal performance across the entire RPM range. When enthusiasts gather to discuss the greatest muscle car engines, the 440 six-pack always enters the conversation. It might not have had the mystique of the Hemi or the racing pedigree of the Boss 429, but it had something perhaps more important. It delivered on its promise every single day. It was an engine that could win races on Sunday and drive to work on Monday, all while returning reasonable fuel economy when driven conservatively. The human element of the six-pack story is equally compelling. The engineers who developed it, men like Willem Weertman and Tom Hoover, were fighting against corporate pressure to keep costs down while meeting increasingly stringent emissions requirements. They managed to create something special within these constraints, proving that limitation often breeds innovation. Their work on the six-pack influenced Chrysler engine development well into the 1970s and beyond. The 440 six-pack also represented a philosophical statement from Chrysler. While Ford and Chevrolet were locked in a cubic-inch war, constantly increasing displacement to chase horsepower numbers, Chrysler took a different approach. They focused on making their existing 440 platform work better extracting maximum performance through intelligent engineering rather than brute force. It was David versus Goliath, except David had 490 pound-feet of torque. Track testing revealed just how effective this approach was. At Detroit Dragway, a stock six-pack Roadrunner with street tires and full exhaust consistently ran 13.5s at 105 mph. Switched to slicks and open headers, and 13.1s at 108 mph were achievable. These times were identical to or better than many engines with higher advertised horsepower ratings. The six-pack proved that peak horsepower numbers didn't tell the whole story. The street racing scene of the early 1970s was where the six-pack truly earned its reputation. On Woodward Avenue in Detroit, on Van Nuys Boulevard in Los Angeles, on countless main streets across America, six-pack cars were teaching lessons in torque application. The engine's ability to hook up and launch hard from low RPM made it virtually unbeatable in stoplight-to-stoplight contests. Many a big block Ford or Chevrolet driver learned the hard way that 390 advertised horsepower didn't mean much when the other guy had 490 pound-feet available from idle. Insurance companies eventually caught on to the six-pack's performance potential. By 1971, insuring a six-pack car for anyone under 25 was virtually impossible. The engine had become a victim of its own success. It was too good at what it did, too capable of getting young drivers into trouble. This insurance crisis, combined with tightening emission standards, sealed the six-pack's fate. The final 446-pack engines rolled off the assembly line in summer 1971. There was no fanfare, no special commemoration. The workers at Chrysler's Trenton engine plant probably didn't realize they were building the last of a legend. The muscle car era was ending, and the six-pack was one of its final casualties. Within a year, compression ratios would drop, carburetors would shrink, and the horsepower wars would become a distant memory. But those who owned six-pack cars knew they had something special. Throughout the dark days of the 1970s and 1980s, when performance cars virtually disappeared, six-pack owners held onto their cars. They maintained them, preserved them, and occasionally, when nobody was looking, they'd mat the throttle and remember what real power felt like. These caretakers preserved not just cars, but a piece of American automotive history. Modern technology has allowed us to fully understand just how good the 446-pack really was. Dyno testing with modern equipment shows that Chrysler's 390 horsepower rating was conservative. Most well-tuned six-pack engines actually produce 410 to 420 horsepower at the flywheel, with some exceptional examples approaching 430. The torque figures were accurate, that 490 pound-feet was real, and it was available almost immediately off idle. The six-pack's design elegance becomes more apparent with time. In an era of ever-increasing complexity, the mechanical simplicity of three carburetors and a progressive linkage seems almost quaint. Yet this simple system delivered performance that modern fuel injection systems struggle to match in terms of response and character. There's something visceral about the sound of those outboard carburetors opening up, the sudden rush of acceleration as 350 CFM of air rushes through the engine. Today's enthusiasts building six-pack clones or restoring original engines face challenges the original owners never imagined. Finding correct date-coded carburetors can cost thousands of dollars. Original intake manifolds are worth their weight in gold. Even the correct air cleaner assembly can fetch $2,000 at swap meets, but the investment is worth it. A properly built 446-pack delivers an experience that no modern engine can replicate. The legacy of the 446-pack extends far beyond just the 14,000 engines built. It influenced a generation of hot rodders who learned that torque, not just horsepower, wins races. It proved that American engineers could create sophisticated solutions to complex problems. Most importantly, It demonstrated that performance and practicality weren't mutually exclusive. You could have your cake and eat it too, as long as that cake was fed through 3 Holley 2-barrels. In the pantheon of American muscle car engines, the 446-pack occupies a unique position. It wasn't the most powerful. The Hemi held that crown. It wasn't the most technologically advanced. Ford's SOHC 427 claimed that title, but it might have been the best all-around street performance engine ever built. It combined massive torque, reasonable fuel economy, excellent reliability, and daily drivability in a package that could embarrass supposedly superior competition. The story of the 446-pack is ultimately a story about engineering excellence triumphing over paper specifications. In a world obsessed with horsepower numbers, Chrysler built an engine that prioritized real-world performance. They understood that torque moves cars, that drivability matters, and that reliability beats peak power every time. The result was an engine that shocked everyone not with its horsepower rating, but with its ability to dominate anything it faced on the street. For those lucky enough to experience a 446-pack in its prime, the memory is unforgettable. The rumble at idle, hinting at barely contained power, the instant response when you press the throttle. The surge of acceleration as those outboard carburetors opened up, the satisfying chirp of tires shifting into second. These weren't just engines. They were mechanical symphonies delivering performance that touched all the senses. The Mopar 446-pack proved that sometimes the best solution isn't the most extreme one. Sometimes the best solution is the one that works every day in every situation without compromise. It proved that 390 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque, delivered through 3 2-barrel carburetors, could shock the automotive world. And shock it did. What's your favorite muscle car engine story? Have you ever experienced the raw torque of a 446-pack? Drop a comment below and share your high-performance memories. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of America's greatest engines, make sure to subscribe for more legendary automotive stories. Until next time, keep those engines running and those tires smoking.